Hello and thanks for staying with us here on News Central Special Independence Broadcast celebrating Senegal at 62. We had Mayor Korsab earlier. We looked at the economy and governance in Senegal. Right now, we'll be switching the conversation to security and governance. And to do that, we have the pleasure of having Professor Mark William Assistant Professor Mark William Deets is an assistant professor of African and World History. He joins us live from Cairo in Egypt. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
It's my privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Now, Senegal has been regarded as a bastion of stability, as the exception in that volatile region of West Africa. It's also known as the Cool Belt. Has seen a lot of coups and instability. How have they been able to, keep this relative calm? Why is there no contagion effect in Senegal?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was a diplomat in Dakar working at the U.S. Embassy, that was often one of the things that I often began my briefs with talking about, with visiting delegations from the U.S. government. And my typical explanation usually has to do with the history, the fact that Saint Louis for so long, and then eventually Dakar, was the seat of the colonial government in French West Africa. There are certain advantages that go with being the capital, right? In terms of investment, in terms of not just infrastructure, but also education, human development, these kinds of things. And so I think that's part of it if we're looking for sort of structural answers. But, I think that you can also credit Senegalese leadership to a certain extent, the political leadership, and to some extent the military leadership as well. They most of them all benefited from the educational institutions that were headquartered there in Senegal, and most of them were very well educated. And I think that Leopold Senghor, the first president, instilled this sense of republicanism that really laid a lasting foundation of strength and integrity for the Senegalese state, even though it hasn't been the richest country in Africa by any means. So I mean, it's still relatively poor. But the one thing that Senegal has always had going for it is its political stability.
All right, Mike, looking at the fact that there's been a lot of political stability and, of course, security stability in Senegal, we also know that the president, that's Macky Sall, actually got the chairmanship seat for the African Union. So do you think this will have any effect on curbing security challenges in the west of Africa?
Well, it's hard for me to read the mind of Macky Sall, but I could see him trying to draw resources and attention to West Africa. I could see him, and I think that Senegal has tried to play this role. I think your introduction to this part of the program talked about Senegal as kind of this bookend of stability in a neighborhood that has seen a lot of instability. And so, the Senegalese have traditionally used their political stability to their advantage. They have used that stability to make claims for leadership in West Africa, certainly within Francophone West Africa. And so I would view this move by President Sall as being, a kind of continuing in that vein. Again, continuing to make this claim to leadership in the sub-region and in the larger African community because of that history of stability, which is, like I said, it's so important. I think, to Senegalese power in the region.
Now, Mark, talking about Senegalese stability, there's an ink blot there. There's a problem, a little problem of Casamance. A lot of people refer to it as Senegal's forgotten war. It's a low-intensity conflict that has been raging for almost 4 decades. What's the genesis of this conflict? And the protagonists in this conflict are the Movement for Democratic Forces of Casamance, MFDC. Who are they, and what are they fighting for?
Right. Yeah, the Movement of Democratic Forces of the Casamance is actually kind of a reincarnation, a modern or contemporary reincarnation of an old post-war political party that was in existence from 1949 to 1954. During that period, as Senegal was sort of moving towards independence and gradually getting more and more autonomy from the French, even though they remained a part of the French Union up until 1958, 59. And so that party disbanded in 1954 when it's probably its most important leader, Emile Badian, agreed to leave the party to join Senghor in his new party, the Bloc Démocratique Sénégalais, the BDS. And so when he did that, that kind of left the old MFDC to sort of wither on the vine. It kind of dissolved. And so the legacy of that party, or the name at least, was reincarnated in the late 1970s and early 1980s when Mamadou Nkrumah Sané and Augustin Diamacoune Senghor, sort of rebirthed this party, at least the name, for their separatist movement. And, in terms of the causes of that conflict, I think the first thing that jumps out at you, when you look at the geography of Senegal, is obviously the geographical separation of the Casamance, which is that southern part of the country, with the Gambia in the middle.
Yeah.
It's a part of the colonial legacy, this colonial partition, because the Gambia was colonized by the British, Senegal was colonized by the French, and then to the south you had Portuguese Guinea, now Guinea-Bissau, colonized by the Portuguese. And so you had all these borders going down, and the Casamance always felt, in the post-colonial dispensation, they felt ignored, they felt marginalized by the gentlemen like Senghor, like Gay, who were running the affairs in northern Senegal. And so they felt like they didn't get enough investment, they didn't get enough attention, they didn't have enough of their own representation in the government. And the economic malaise that came out of the 1970s with structural adjustment, increasing desertification from the Sahel, so the economic problems that came with that, all of that came to a head in the late 1970s. Another key factor was in 1964, Senegal passed a national domain law, basically, taking over land. From the Casamance point of view, they had all these people coming from northern Senegal to take over some of these new privatized parcels, whereas in the Casamance, land had been communal for quite some time. And so all of this new regime, these leaders from the Casamance, like Father Diamacoune, this Catholic priest, and like Mamadou Nkrumah Sané, began to feel marginalized and cheated out of the post-colonial dispensation. So you've got that geographical separation, and then you have kind of a cultural separation as well.
Okay.
the northern Senegal being the largest ethnic group Wolof, the lower Casamance, the largest ethnic group, majority ethnic group being Jola, and in the Casamance, this area being one of the places where Catholic missionaries had some effect. And so that 5% of Senegal, which is Christian, that's a part of where those missionaries had some effect.
All right, Mike, looking at the causes of this Casamance crisis, talking about ethnic rivalry, religion, and of course, geographical sentiments, let's fast forward to 2000, where there were a bit of peace talks, but unfortunately got compounded due to the fact that Senegalese government refused independence of Casamance. But now the military has launched the so-called mopping up operations. Do you think that the Senegalese military is well equipped enough to deal with this rebels and this crisis?
Yeah, and why has it gone on for 40 years?
Yeah, those are great questions. Man, if I could come up with an answer to that last one, Gbenga, maybe I could win a Nobel Prize or something. Yeah, why has it continued for 40 years? Rita, I think you're right to think about like what is different, what has changed. It's been 40 years. It's not the first time that the Senegalese government, the Senegalese military, has conducted one of these this ratissage, this mopping up operation, as you mentioned, or kind of sweeping through the area, trying to get rid of all the MFDC. They've tried this many times to no effect. If anything, it's probably counterproductive because it just turns the population against them more and more. But the thing that's different, the thing that has changed, is that you now have Senegalese troops on Gambian territory. So the fact that you now have Senegalese troops in the Gambia, and they went in there in 2017 after the last presidential election, when President Yahya Jammeh refused to step down after losing the election. So eventually there was a kind of a constitutional crisis for him eventually to be convinced by the other leaders of ECOWAS to step down. And then Senegal stepped in to kind of be the peacekeepers, to be the force on the ground that would implement that, which probably seemed like the logical choice, given the fact that Senegal completely surrounds the Gambia and therefore, is already forward deployed in order to be able to get their forces into the country. However, that also meant the realization of the Gambia's greatest security fear, which is being invaded by Senegal. And so, you now have, the constitutional crisis in the Gambia was resolved, and you now have President Adama Barrow, who's in power there. So, but you still have Senegalese troops on the ground in the Gambia. And so the tactical advantage that the MFDC had always enjoyed was being able to hide behind those international borders, either in the Gambia or in Guinea-Bissau, so on both sides of the Casamance, to the north and to the south, and then come across the border when they want to, set up an ambush, punch the Senegalese military in the face, and then run back across that international border. Well, as you can see, now that Senegalese armed forces are also in the Gambia, that took away their ability to do that along that northern border. And probably the most important MFDC military leader, Salif Sadio, has been positioned along that northern border, and his forces have been positioned along that northern border. So all of that has kind of led to this conflagration of the conflict. So yeah, to answer your question, Rita, that's the thing that has changed. To answer your question, Gbenga, again, like I don't know that I can necessarily provide a solution to the conflict, but I do know that because of the for one thing, the passage of time. I mean, you know, more and more of this older generation of the original, those MFDC fighters, many of them, either they're elderly or some of them have passed away. So I think that there's hope with the younger generation to see the possibilities of peace. So, you know, I'm hopeful for that. I'm also hopeful that eventually all sides will just finally say they've had enough. I think that it's a relatively few number of Atika leaders. That's the name of the military forces of the rebel movement, Atika. You know, I think it's relatively a few number of them, guys like Salif Saggio, guys like Cesar Tutmajat, who are still continuing this conflict.
Now, Mark, as a scholar of African and world history, we see a pattern here. There's a local population that feels disconnected from the central government, their underlying grievances, they feel they're not part of it. And then there's an armed struggle for independence. We've seen this play out in parts of Nigeria. We've seen it in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. There's that problem in Ambazonia. And in Cameroon, looking at the history of the world and conflict resolution, is independence struggle, armed independence struggle, always a way to get the attention of the central governments? Because this conflict gets a little or no attention in the international community. What's the best approach to this?
Yeah, and I think that those governments, the current nation states that are in power there, they want to keep them out of the news. You know, they don't like international media or the international community getting into their business, interfering in their affairs, which that makes sense, right? I mean, nobody likes that. Yeah. So from that standpoint, yes, that makes sense. And this is one of the great challenges that was left to African leaders after colonialism. There are a number of historians who've written about this. One of the most famous was a British historian named Basil Davidson, who talked about the black man's burden as being taking these old colonial states and making them independent nation states. For people who had never necessarily thought of themselves in these sort of nationalistic terms before. So, I think that remains a challenge. So in addition to kind of the state building things that I was talking about earlier with Rita, I think that the challenge of nation building, building nationalism, in a way that doesn't other people, right? That doesn't drive them away, that invites those marginalized regions that you're talking about into the national life and to participate in the nation. And so that's tough. That's tough to do in cultural terms. It's tough to do in financial terms, especially given the economic condition of the post-colonial state in Africa.
Okay, Mark, if we're looking at the MFDC, we know that right now they're split into different factions. We're looking at the way forward now, and there's a lot of growing protests, growing calls for the independence of Casamance. And one of the hardline wing is Salif Saggio. So I know you can't see the future, but with the knowledge that you have, let's say if independence of Casamance were to happen, which of these rival factions do you think would have overall control of Casamance?
Gosh, I almost hate to speculate about that, because
and are we going to have another South Sudan type situation?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, be careful what you wish for. You know, if you're Casamance, do you really want to become a small strip along the West African coast? Very much like the Gambia now. sandwiched in between the Gambia and Guinea-Bissau in that region. Is that really what you want? Yeah, so be careful what you wish for. So I hesitate to speculate, but on the other hand, if I had to guess, like who would emerge in some kind of post-secessionism environment, I mean, the first one right now, yeah, would be Salif Sadio. He's the guy with the guns, and he's probably the guy with not only the most military power but political power at this point. And so he would follow on this history of these former rebel leaders like Charles Taylor in Liberia, who went from rebel leader to being president. On the other hand, there is a group of these elite Casamance who would probably try to step in and join something like that as well. I would imagine that if something like that happened, that you would see Nkrumah Sane try to return from Paris, where he's in exile right now, in order to have some kind of influence, have some kind of role in a Casamance government. But yeah, like I said, be careful what you wish for. On the other hand, as I've said before, the fact that Senegal still occasionally treats the Casamance like a separate country, it has been problematic. There was a story a few years ago. I think I mentioned this on your channel last week. There was a story a few years ago about Casamance flying into the Dakar airport and having to go through immigration. And again, why would you have to do that if that's your own country? So, yeah, hopefully they can resolve some of these issues.
Now, President Macky Sall said resolving the Casamance problem was a priority for him. How much has the Senegalese government done? Are there overtures to bring Casamance into part of the whole of Senegal to address some of those economic grievances and that has led to this call for independence? Because the feelers on the ground, the ordinary Casamance, I don't think they have that loss for independence anymore, because the rebel group has now started, they turned their aggression towards local population, and they don't enjoy that popularity they did a few decades ago.
Right. Yeah, they call the current situation, they've been calling it ni paix ni guerre, in French, which means neither war nor peace. And so, yeah, it's a very dire situation, and it has been a priority of just about every president, since Abdou Diouf, who was the president in 1982 when this all began. And the various Senegalese governments have tried various iterations of the carrot and the stick. So sometimes, dangling the carrot and trying to get the Casamance to come to the negotiating table, to consider what concessions they can give to the MFDC short of full independence. Full independence has always been off the table for the Senegalese government. That has never been something that they've actually considered. But they've talked about various levels of autonomy. One wonders what that might look like. But they use the word autonomy. But yeah, Abdoulaye Wade said the same thing when he was elected in 2000. He said he was going to resolve the Casamance conflict in 100 days. Obviously, that did not happen. But the strategy that he tried, partly in partnership with the international community, and especially the US government at the time, was a peace-building approach of basically providing financial incentive to get various stakeholders to come to the negotiating table to discuss peace. But at the end of the day, they couldn't really find a way forward, even though they achieved this peace accord in December of 2004. They left negotiations after that to figure out, you know, the particulars of that and how to work that out. And then violence resumed in March of 2006, and so that effort kind of fell apart as well. So Macky Sall is now the president, and he's saying the same thing. He's trying to make it a priority. But yeah, it remains to be seen how effective his strategy will be.
Okay, Mark, before we let you go, there's been a question mark by some quarters on the international community and what exactly they have actually done to try and forestall this crisis between the Casamance and the Senegal government. Do you think the international community has actually kind of like a bit removed itself, or there's been not much response from the international community?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, Rita, I think that the international community, I mean, the involvement of the international community has changed over time. It's not always been the same. You know, there are particular surges at particular times, and sometimes it has to do with kind of a question about which international partner is going to play a leading role. In the 1990s, that was the French government as the former colonial power. In the 2000s, during this sort of peace building regime, that was the United States government. You know, kind of in that era, the post 9/11 era, with the Bush administration and you know, the Iraq War and all those kinds of things that were going on. The United States was trying to lead in this effort as well. The EU has come together and tried to lead as well. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, of course, the AU is aware of this, they're involved. You can find written documents that the AU has produced on this. But for the most part, like I said, the Senegalese were pretty sensitive about this. And, you know, like you said in the beginning, Gbenga, it is kind of a stain on the honor and the reputation of Senegal as this incredibly stable French West African country. That is a model of democracy for the rest of the continent. And so, you know, the Senegalese government is not always willing to engage with all of its partners in that regard, and to be, you know, taking assistance and advice from other members of the international community, whether on the continent or outside of it. So, the international community, though, has played a role, and they can continue to play a role. I think that they can continue to provide incentives, to help encourage the Senegalese government to pursue peace. Of course, the question is, like, what are the particulars of that? What exactly does that mean in concrete terms?
Thank you, Mark. We'll go on a quick break. Just hold your thoughts there. When we come back, we'll look at the regional players, Guinea-Bissau and Guinea, that are caught in the crosshairs of this conflict. Do stay with us. Remember, you're watching a special broadcast celebrating Senegal's 62nd Independence Day. We're looking at the security situation in Senegal. Here are a few facts about the country called Senegal as it marks its 62nd independence anniversary today. You're welcome back to our special Independence Day broadcast commemorating Senegal at 62. We still have William Deets, Assistant Professor of African History and World History here with us discussing the security situation in Senegal. Now, Mark, before we went on the break, I was going to ask you a question about the regional players, the stakeholders here, Gambia and Guinea-Bissau. Now, Gambia is caught in the crosshairs in this conflict. It shares its southern border with Casamance. According to the National Disaster Management Agency, about 5,626 people were displaced within the Gambia itself after Senegalese bullets landed in border villages. What's the Gambia's government position in this conflict? Are they aligned with Dhaka? And also the Guinea-Bissau government, what's their position in all of this?
Well, I think that the Gambian government was aligned with Senegal originally because Adama Barrow met with Senegalese officials before going to the Gambia to kind of, take over after Yahya Jammeh had agreed to step down in 2017. I haven't read anything recently, but I would assume that the Gambians are beginning to wear a little bit, that the Senegalese might beginning to wear out their welcome somewhat in terms of the position of the Senegalese military and its incursions on Gambian territory. I think that was acceptable for a time, but of course not, permanently. And so, yeah, I would think that the Gambians will want to see that end rather quickly. That the position of Guinea-Bissau to the south is also it's probably even more fraught. It's the state of Guinea-Bissau has had issues with political military relations for quite a bit of its existence. I had one military officer from the region basically tell me that, when you're the Armed Forces Chief of Staff in Guinea-Bissau, you don't retire. There's only one way that you go out, and it's not alive. So, I certainly hope that the Bissau Ghanaians can turn around that legacy, but recent events have not looked promising in that regard. 10 years ago, they faced a huge crisis with the volume of drugs that were being trafficked through the country, coming from South America, trafficked through Guinea-Bissau for points north, basically to get to Europeans in Western Europe for the most part. I mean, some of it stayed local, but most of it was going to the European market. So, all that to say that that southern neighbor has been quite unstable and has actually been willing to accept, again, incursions on its sovereignty, much like I was talking about with the Gambia. So
Mark.
allowing Senegalese incursions into Guinea-Bissau.
Yeah, sorry to butt in here, Mark, and I'm happy you mentioned incursions. Yahya Jammeh today is in exile in Equatorial Guinea. It's been a few years since he was president. Adama Barrow won a second term. Why are Senegalese and ECOMIG troops still in the Gambia?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'd love to put that question to President Barrow. But if I had to hazard a guess,
yes.
An educated guess, I would imagine that the Senegalese army is so much more capable than the Gambian army.
But there's no threat to security. It's quite a stable country, the Gambia. They just had elections and peaceful democratic transition, even though it was the incumbent that won, with no troubles.
Yes. No, that's right. So you raise a good question. Why are they willing to continue to accept the presence of those troops? Again, I think that it has to do with the stability that comes with that, at least from Barrow's point of view. Again, bear in mind that Barrow went to Dakar before, during the crisis with Yahya Jammeh. He went to Dakar and met with Senegalese officials before he went to Banjul to become the president the first time, for his first term, I mean. And so, I'm not suggesting that he is a plant or that he's merely a client of the Senegalese government, but I am suggesting that in general, they've been on friendly terms. And rather than seeing the Senegalese as a competitor or as an enemy, I think that Barra has seen them more as a partner. And so, again, like I said, I don't think that he necessarily wants to accept that condition forever. But I think for the moment, he's been happy to accept Senegalese assistance in the security sector.
All right, Mark, I'm happy that you mentioned the issue of drug trafficking. And as much as Senegal has been able to shelve itself from the insecurity situations going around its borders, we still have internal and external networks of organized crime going around the particular area, illicit drug trafficking of cocaine. We see money laundering as being a major source of revenue for terrorists. You also see gold mining operations where use it to fund terrorists. So how can all these illicit operations be curbed by the Senegalese government?
Yeah, great question. Great question. For one thing, I think there's been quite a bit of work done between the Senegalese security forces and the international community just on border enforcement. But the other things are the counterterrorism initiatives that have been joined by the Senegalese government with various international partners, including the United States. Of course, after 9/11, 2001, the United States was very keen to have its West African partners join it in various sorts of counterterrorism initiatives, including that of intelligence sharing. And that is a thing that's very sensitive, for almost any nation state, but especially for countries where there has been, tension, right? It's kind of trust. It's difficult to build that sort of trust to actually start sharing intelligence that eventually could begin to expose intelligence sources and methods. There's been some limitation to that anyway, at least to that partnership with the United States, because the United States wanted to keep it focused on transnational Islamic terrorism, basically the kinds of forces like Al-Qaeda that it was fighting at the time. But as you know, the Senegalese state doesn't, they've got higher priority issues than that, than these transnational terrorist groups. They've tried to classify the MFDC as a terrorist group, for example, in order to get some of that funding. So these trafficking networks, though, have been a real issue because they've been there for, in some cases, for centuries, right? Some of these trafficking networks, they traffic all kinds of, they've trafficked all kinds of things in the past. That's how they make their living. And it doesn't really matter what the content is of what's being trafficked. The point is the trafficking and the business that's there. And it just so happens that in the last 10 or 15 years, the main thing has been these drugs coming from South America. And, you also have the trafficking of precious hardwoods, logging that has been a real issue. So there's been violence with the MFDC connected to that. And trying to get those hardwoods and those forest products to places like China and other members of the international community. So all of these kind of add up to kind of contribute, I would say, to the instability. Of course, one would hope that there's the possibility of, by joining basically this sort of global capitalist system, that there would be more stability attached to that. But because so much of this traffic has been illicit, it has been anything but stability producing.
Now, Mark, as we begin to wrap up, and it's quite instructive that on the occasion of Senegal's Independence Day, there's a region within Senegal that is also fighting for independence. A few weeks ago, President Macky Sall ordered military operations, mop-up operations in Casamance. How do you see this conflict ending, this Senegal's forgotten war? Do you think it would end militarily or through a negotiated settlement? And will they have some form of a loose confederation?
Yeah, I don't see it.
In 1 minute, if you could, because we're fast pressed for time. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. I don't see it ending militarily, to tell you the truth. Again, the MFDC began as a movement with very rudimentary weapons, right? And so the issue is not necessarily the weapons. I think that the solution has to be political. The Casamance have to see the benefits of joining the Senegalese nation and participating in the Senegalese nation and the Senegalese national life. I think it helps, believe it or not, to have cultural icons like Sadio Mane, for example, who comes from the Casamance, this star soccer player, one of the best soccer players in the world, of whom the entire Senegalese nation is very proud, including Casamance. The way I see this ending is, again, that older generation of these separatists who really began this movement in 1982, that a few of those key leaders either need to move on. I don't see many of them giving up the power that they have voluntarily, or be killed in combat. In the sort of intensity of the combat operations that have begun, that have been restarted, that could be a possibility.
Thank you very much, Mark, for being a part of this special broadcast. We do appreciate your insights. Unfortunately, this is where we wrap up our conversation on today's special Independence broadcast celebrating Senegal at 62. We appreciate your contributions and insights to the broadcast.
Thank you, Gbenga. Happy 62nd Independence Day to all the Senegalese, and Ramadan Kareem.